Hello, and welcome to God Pods, faith conversation podcasts brought to you by the Church in the 21st Century Center at Boston College. My name is Andrew Craig. I'm the Assistant Director of Communications and Operations here at the C21 Center. In this episode, we'll hear a panel Q&A about the 3-short documentary, Longing for More, Young Adult Hispanic Catholics, which shares the spiritual journeys of young Hispanic Catholics in the United States as they grapple with questions of identity, faith, and belonging. After the Boston College premiere of the film, we enjoyed this conversation with the executive producer, Hosffman Ospino, professor of Theology and Hispanic Ministry at Boston College's Clough School of Theology and Ministry, and the filmmakers who directed the documentary, James Rutenbeck and Sabrina Avilés. You can find all 3 short documentaries at bc.edu/longing-for-more. Enjoy the podcast.
It's my pleasure to introduce you to the filmmakers who accepted the invitation to work with us here at Boston College on this particular project, Sabrina Avilés and James Rutenbeck. And so I think that I'm gonna ask only one question, and then I just wanna open it up to your reactions, your own thoughts, your own questions that you may have. But I want to start with Sabrina. Sabrina, you were highly involved in all 3 of the films, but particularly the Acolytes of Brooklyn, isn't it? South Bronx. There you go. And can you share a little bit more about your experience engaging these young women and men in the South Bronx, and you also as a Latina who grew up in the United States of America, and your relationship with Catholicism. So what connections did you see there?
Thank you for having us, first of all. So one of the reasons the South Bronx spoke to me is because I was born and raised. The characters were Dominican, and my mom is Dominican. My dad was from Puerto Rico, but I was born and raised in Washington Heights. And so I knew New York very well. I also knew the South Bronx very well because my father had a bodega there for many, many years, and I used to work in the summer bodega. So on many levels, the piece, I related to the piece first and foremost because of the place, because of the family, a similar background. But also growing up in New York and then moving to New Jersey, I was also very much formed by the Catholic Church because I've been to Catholic Church. I went to Catholic Church from the times I was in first grade to all the way through high school. So for me, it was one, exciting to be back in my neighborhood, more or less, and 2, I just related to just a sense of just it being kind of a part of my life, Catholicism, as kind of just second nature. It was, it very much formed who I am today, and it's kind of my moral compass, even though I, like many of our characters here, have just maybe some personal issues with some of the doctrine. But overall, it was a cultural connection, a cultural and maybe a spiritual connection that I had with them. And I think that's it. I don't know what else to expand upon.
Great, thank you. James, when we were considering the idea of a documentary, I, not being an artist and not being a filmmaker, so my idea of a documentary was what I normally see, somebody who goes and interviews people and then tells the story, and you tell someone else's story. But James educated me, and he said, well, no, that's not how we work. Can you say a little bit more about the style and the approach that you took with this directing this particular documentary?
Yes, certainly. Well, I had known Hosffman from work that I had done in Lawrence, Mass, at St. Patrick's Church. And I think we worked together on a project called Scenes from a Parish. And my background as a filmmaker is more in the cinema verite movement from the late 60s. One of my teachers was one of the founders of that movement, and the idea is to try to film life as it's happening and trying to create a feeling of being in a space and in a place, as opposed to trying to do something that might be more newsy or journalistic, I guess, with just interviews and then what is called B-roll, which is, just shots that somebody runs out and gets to use as wallpaper for a story for interview bites. So it's very much trying to be with people and get to know people well, spend time with people, which is what we do with all these participants in these films, and be with them and start to understand their lives better and be close to them. And Sabrina was just essential to this project, culturally and aesthetically in many other ways. So what we were trying to do is tell a story more with images, cinematically, as opposed to trying to piece together a narrative from interview pieces. Although we use interviews too.
And it took us 7 years working on this particular project. We met incredible people along the way, but more in particular, something that I appreciated was entering into a relationship, with the people who were part of the documentary, and listening to them, learning from them about their own journeys. I have a million questions that I could ask here, but maybe some comments or some questions that you may have about the film, for questions that you may have for any of us up here, and then let's see, let's open it up. We're back there, please.
Thank you so much for making this film, and Hosffman, this is amazing. Giving just light to some of these stories, especially I'm a mother of 3 young Catholics. I still think I'm young. So Hosffman was actually my confirmation teacher a long time ago. So I still remember and feel the same way as I did when I was 16. I guess I'm curious, based on what you all learned from these characters. I'm wondering, and this is probably an unfair question, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm wondering if you were to speak with them, sort of based on the different journeys that they had, what would they say to what some of us perceive is a definite silence from the Catholic Church as to the reality that our communities are feeling now? Like, I'm wondering what these characters will say to that. And they all have very different approaches to their sort of relationship with God. But I'm curious, if you had to guess, based on the relationships that you build with these characters, maybe you would know what they would say?
I do know what Judith would say, because Judith is now in the thick of it. Judith was a city councilor when we interviewed her. She's now Chelsea's and Everett first ever state rep, and she's in the thick of it right now. So I don't know, she's no longer with the Catholic Church, but she's very much informed by her spiritual practice. And honestly, to be honest with you, I think that she has been hardened a little bit with her career. She even says she's a little bit more cynical. And that might be across the board in general, that she's cynical in terms of her espousing a new church and also just her career. So, but I also know that she's become quite a politician. So she navigates that line of trying to stay in the middle and not make anybody on either side too angry. I don't know.
I'm interested in the deafening silence that you referred to. Could you just tell us a bit more of what
Yeah.
you're thinking.
I mean, I think that a lot of us, our faith is such a huge part of who we are. And I think those of us that have sort of an orientation towards social justice, I think, especially the church here in the United States, for whatever reason, I mean, I can come up with my own sort of thinking as to why that is. But I think it's a missed opportunity, and especially for young people that are seeing sort of the decline of whatever is happening right now. What people can determine how they feel about the situation now, but I think we can all agree that this is probably not the best situation for everyone, especially our communities right now. So I'm just curious as to how these characters would respond to this reality that our young people are seeing, and how do we I think about specifically the last film, and that sort of that devotion and that, I don't know, that passion that in the Bronx, the South Bronx example. How do we sort of bridge that gap between the intellectual and the reality to that? Like, how do we expect our young people to bridge that gap?
I would think that Mauricio is still doing the work that he did then, because obviously a lot of his work is informed by social justice, and so I would see he would probably continue to be as outspoken as possible. I couldn't tell you what the young people from the Acolytes film. My guess is, and this is my personal feeling, I can't tell you what they're doing, is that they were, one of the reasons, if you notice how we juxtaposed the visuals of the, for lack of a better word, or using an allegory, Sodom and Gomorrah of the South Bronx, and how they were kind of in their own little world, isolated and praying. I think that might be their way of reconciling. Personally, that's not how I would choose. I think they are maybe for them prayer is enough. Whereas somebody like me or even Mauricio would be out there crossing the border or something, or the ground, making themselves heard, being active, being propelled by their spirituality to become much more socially active. But I think, and I have to believe that maybe there are churches that, say prayers enough, and others that are much more, I don't know what the word is, I wouldn't say bold, to stand up and speak truth to power and the injustice that is being leveled on our community. So, for me, I'm not a practicing Catholic, but again, that, love and kindness and humanity and compassion are the things that I was told from the Catholic Church. And to me, it's a natural synergy, it's a natural connection to have empathy and fight injustice. So.
James, you had some thoughts on that?
One thing I thought about was Mauricio, and he said, don't necessarily look to the bishops for leadership. The leadership has always come from the grassroots. And I thought the U.S. bishops were being supportive of immigrants in the face of everything that's going on, although I actually don't know enough to actually comment on this in a way. I heard what Cardinal Dolan said over the weekend. I wasn't terribly impressed by that, but I'm just not sure. Maybe you could.
Yeah, maybe something that comes to my mind is that it's very interesting to see this group of young Catholics. These are young adult Catholics who grew up in the United States of America, who are, as a matter of fact, all of them are highly educated. They have gone to college. Mauricio has 2 doctorates himself. We have an influential politician. And my sense is that when confronted with these realities, the realities that affect actually the most vulnerable in our society, they would be the most outspoken. You know, they will be the ones who will say, "We got to do something. We got to say something." But at the same time, these young Catholics, in many ways, also embody much of the experience of many other Latina Catholics who are concerned about sometimes the institutional silence, or they are concerned about the fact that they want to do more, but they don't have the support of doing more. And I was so glad to see that we were able to collaborate with Bishop Espaillat, from New York, because he's one of those bishops that actually, you see him journeying with the community, with young people, and working with the people. Bishop Barbosa, you are always with the community as well. So you're visibly there. And I think that many young Latinos, young adult Latinos, want that, that their bishops, that their priests, that their lay leaders, that their theologians and their educators are visibly with them. And when they don't see that, some of them actually walk away. They just get turned off, and they simply stop going to churches, But even Judith, even though she's going to another church and so on, repeatedly she said, Catholicism shaped me, and those values are going to be with me. And I would like to see more of us, in at least working in the institutional church, being more attentive to engage in these Latinas. Why don't we have one last question, or perhaps or reflection that you may have? Anyone who wants? Perfect. Yes.
At first, I want to thank you guys. This was an amazing film. It was very interesting how you guys were able to bring very versatile individuals and their different experience with Catholicism. My question to you guys is, how was the process of choosing the individuals for this film? Did you guys introduce several people? Were these people that you guys previously knew, or how was that process like? Thank you.
So that's a great question. It's a big part of what we do as filmmakers in our pre-production work, and I think of it as casting in a way. Like these are not fiction films, but they are narrative films in a way. And partly it's like the kind of people that are maybe charismatic in some ways, or well-spoken, or not necessarily that. But for the Avilés film, it was sort of like we talked to several different young people who were part of this group. And we had to think about, sort of in advance, about, well, how many characters make sense for this to tell this story, and figure out what the story, how it might evolve over time based on what was happening with those characters when we started and when we first met them, and how might they interact with one another to help create this narrative. With Mauricio, we met him at a conference at Notre Dame and spent time with him, and just everyone sort of fell in love with him, and Hosffman said, well, that will be our first film story. And then with Judith, Sabrina had known Judith, and Hosffman was really interested in this idea of public servant, and how a Catholic might bring their values from the church into the public space. So each film it has sort of a different, bent in a way, but the characters, sometimes they just appear, and then at other times, like in the Bronx, we did a lot more searching and like talking to a lot of different people.
And it wasn't easy, because in the US there are about 40 million Latinas who are around that age, children and youth, young adults. So technically, we could have chosen you, or we could have chosen so many other people and invited. And there are so many exciting stories. I mean, this is something that really humbles me. There are so many exciting Latina Catholic stories that could be highlighted. And my encouragement would be for people working in parishes or dioceses to really take the time and learn about the stories of these young women and men, because they're very exciting, and there's so much to learn. Sometimes in ministry, we tend to talk a lot about Latinos, Latinas, what we have modeled, and I believe that that's the beauty of what Sabrina and James have done, is not talk about Latinos, but the Latinos' lives, tell their own story, and that is transforming.
I was also going to say that for the first two films, obviously we showed two examples in which the Latinos, our characters kind of struggled with the film, with their spirituality, with the church, and one kind of came to accept it on his terms, which is Mauricio, and then Judith walked away. And we thought that our three stories were going to focus on that struggle, but I guess after 7 years, we were like, well, let's look for something different. We're like, well, what if we focus on young Latino adults that really embrace the church? And that's when we came across the young Dominicans. And by the way, they're all young adults, but one of the most also important things was that after we decided on our characters, we went physically and met their parents, just to get buy-in from the family, to make sure that they were all in. And by the end of it, especially Chris's parents, they were just inviting us to dinner, and they were just they loved the entire experience. So, but that's really important. That cultural connection is really important, because we had to be with them for a certain moment in time and had to gain their trust, so that they know that what we're doing was true to their experiences. What we were documenting was true to their experiences.
One of the things that Hosffman is very humble, and maybe you learned something from us, I don't know, but I do know that your presence with us and the way you've allowed us the freedom to work and to develop these films was enormously helpful to us, and your support meant so much to us.
Yeah, very much so, because in client relationships, usually a lot of people, clients tend to kind of micromanage the process. So it creatively, it kind of stunts you a little bit, and you learn to navigate, but he really, rarely did there were a couple things it's like, no, not this, but most of it was like, he gave us all this real wonderful creative control and trusted us. So we, it just made our work better, These are traditional documentaries, but at the same time they aren't, because they're not like these big, what's the conflict, what's the struggle? The struggles are so much more nuanced, but I think that consistency of nuance is evident in all three films, because they're all really like spiritual struggles, which are not always like black and white.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of God Pods. For more faith resources, visit our website at bc.edu/C21, or find us on social media at C21 Center.